and it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Anne Arundel County House Delegation meeting. My name is Delegate Mike Rogers, and I am honored to serve as chair this session. So with that, we will go to our vice chair, Delegate Heather Bagnall, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Kipke. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I know that we all had hoped to be back in person by this point, but as we were saying, COVID is tricky. So I wanted to offer a simple blessing today that means a lot to me and means a lot to my heritage, and I hope it means a lot to you as well. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon you and the rain fall gently down. May God hold. May God hold in the palm of his hand, and until days, may God hold in the palm of his hand. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance and offering us that prayer. So with that, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge all of our special guests this morning. And I'm going to apologize up front if I miss someone who may not be on the screen, but I'd like to start with members from our Senate delegation. I see Senator Pam Beidle, my senator. I see Senator Brian Simon-Nair. That's all I see from the Senate side right now, but I know that we may have some other folks that may be joining us, and I'm sort of scanning. I know that Chair Elfreth may be joining us later, so I want to acknowledge her in advance, and I'll go ahead and acknowledge Senator Riley and Senator Rosa Pep in case they happen to join us so that they are not forgotten. And so I also see on the call members of the Board of Education. So I see President Dr. Tobin, who's with us today. I see Ms. Schallheim. I see Ms. Corkindale. I see Mr. Silkworth. And I think that's all I see at this point. But again, someone let me know if someone else comes on board. I want to acknowledge our superintendent of the Anne Arundel County Public School System, Dr. Alato. And Dr. Alato, I will give you the opportunity to acknowledge your staff.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers, Vice Chair Bagnall, and members of the delegation. Thank you. I'm delighted to spend some time with you this morning. Thank you for introducing members of the board. If you'll allow me just to ensure, in case somebody is on, that you or Delegate Rogers, I'm unable to see on my screen. Ms. Bumi Amasori, our student member, may have joined us or hopefully will. Mrs. Melissa Ellis, Mrs. Corinne Frank. You mentioned Mrs. Corkindale, Mrs. Schallheim, Mrs. Gloria Dent, I hope will join us. Of course, you recognize Mr. Silkworth, our vice president, and Dr. Joanna Tobin, our president. You'll hear from her momentarily. I do thank you, Mr. Chairman, want to introduce some of the most extraordinary professionals I've worked with in my 35 years as an educator. These are the people that you will most likely work directly with as you conduct your business during this legislative session. They are Mr. Matt Stansky, our Director of Budget and Finance, Mr. Bob Mosier, our Chief Communications Officer, Mrs. Jeanette Ortiz, our Legislative and Policy Counsel, who I know each and every one of you know well, Mr. Alex Shaknovich, our Chief Operating Officer, Mrs. Monique Jackson, our Deputy Superintendent for Student and School Support, and Dr. Maureen McMahon, our Deputy Superintendent for Academics and Strategic Initiatives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Arlato. And so we have one order of business before we come back to you for some remarks. And I see that the Senate Chair, Chair Elfreth has since joined us. So thank you for being here. And I see, I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge Delegate Munoz, who this is her first regular session meeting, who has joined us and is on the call this morning. So welcome, Delegate Munoz. So with that, the one order of business we have before us today is the adoption of the rules and procedures for the delegation. That the rules and procedures have been sent out to everyone. Everyone should have had a chance to take a look at them. And so unless there are any questions, I'd like to entertain a motion from the floor.
Move to adopt the rules.
Is there a second? So it has been moved and properly seconded. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll?
Vice Chairman Bagnell.
Yes.
Delegate Barnes. Delegate Bartlett.
Yes.
Delegate Carey.
Yes.
Delegate Chang.
Yes.
Delegate Chisholm.
Yes.
Delegate Henson. Delegate Henson.
Yes.
Delegate Howard.
Yes.
Delegate Jones.
Yes.
Delegate Kipke.
Yes.
Delegate Lehman.
Yes.
Delegate Munoz.
Yes.
Delegate Pena Melnick.
Yes.
Delegate Saab.
Yes.
Chairman Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 14, 1 absent, and the motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So just a couple other administrative announcements. Dues will be collected for the delegation in the amount of $55, as has been the precedent since I've been here. And it has been offered up that we make a donation to the food bank as we did last year. So we can certainly, if there are other options that members would like to offer, we can certainly entertain those. But I would just ask if there are any other options that we send an email to our secretary and we can sort of entertain those or just move forward with what we did last year. I would ask that all the subcommittee chairs just please let Sienna know when your scheduled meetings are, and she can help set up the Zooms so that that's one less thing that you have to do. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Arlato for his remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Dr. Tobin is going to begin, and then she'll turn things back over to me and share some updates regarding the school system. Dr. Tobin.
Thank you. And good morning, Chair Rogers, Vice Chair Bagnall, and members of the delegation. It is so good to be with you again, even if we are virtual, to talk about our school system, our students, and the ways in which we can work together to benefit everyone in Anne Arundel County. I know that our time is short this morning, so let me say at the outset that our board members and I are available for conversation at any time on any subject. I do want to highlight a few things very quickly before I turn this over to Dr. Olato. First, I know, as I know is obvious, we are continuing to work through the many aspects of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, we opened for full in-person instruction in August, and our goal is to remain that way through June. We have had to shift some schools to virtual learning temporarily because of outbreaks, but I am, and I hope you are, incredibly proud of the work Dr. Olato, his team, and our school-based staff are doing to educate our children every day. There are many challenges, and their work is remarkable. Secondly, I want to touch briefly on the blueprint because I know Dr. Arlotto will talk more about it in a few minutes. Again, let me be clear. We all want Blueprint to succeed. This is an extraordinary opportunity. There are some issues related to early childhood education, funding streams, and staffing that will demand our and your attention. Ms. Ortiz, of course, does a brilliant job of representing our interests in the halls of Annapolis, so I urge you to speak with her or one of us if you have questions or need information. Finally, I just want to say a few words about school construction. We continue to have an infrastructure backlog of about $2.1 billion, and in addition to that, we have a $476 million maintenance backlog. We have the 6th oldest building fleet among school systems in Maryland. We grew by 8,000 students in the last decade and are projected to grow by 10,000 more in the decade ahead. Quite simply, we have got to make quicker headway on our backlogs if we are to provide every one of our students with the educational environment they deserve, and frankly, to be in a position to pivot should we have to, not only for this pandemic, but whatever may be coming down the pike. Thank you again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Arlotto.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tobin. Again, thank you, Chairman Rogers, Vice Chair Bagnall, and members of the delegation. I will purposely keep my remarks brief as I plan to share some information in two important and much discussed areas. First, I'll share some updates regarding our ongoing COVID mitigation strategies and the impacts on our schools. And second, I'll share some information regarding our budget development work. Let me start with our focus and challenge at this present time, COVID, and keeping our schools open for in-person instruction. We are, of course, delighted to have our students and staff back in schools and in their classrooms. If we have learned anything over the past year and a half, for the majority of our students, there is no substitute for in-person instruction. With the ongoing surge in COVID cases and the implementation of mitigating strategies, this continues to be a challenge each and every day. We continue to work closely with our partners at the Anne Arundel County Department of Health, and will continue to seek their guidance and direction with regard to the health and safety of our schools and offices. Currently, we have 6 schools closed for in-person instruction as a result of declared outbreaks. Those schools switched to virtual instruction for a 5-day period, and the buildings are thoroughly cleaned. The threshold for an outbreak in a school is 5% of the students and staff test positive for COVID during a 14-day period. Those numbers are monitored throughout each day by Department of Health and AACPS personnel. As you are aware, there was a mask mandate in schools throughout Maryland, and those regulations have been updated to include provisions or options for lifting of face covering requirements. There are 3 options available to school systems at this time. The first, when 80% of the county's population is fully vaccinated. The second is when 80% of the students and staff of an individual school facility are fully vaccinated. Or the third option is when the county has sustained 14 consecutive days of moderate to low COVID-19 transmission rates. We have reviewed these options carefully with Dr. Kalyana Raman and his team at the Department of Health, and we will work with them and watch those metrics in the coming weeks and months, as I said, in conjunction with the Department of Health, and we'll act accordingly if and when we reach those metric thresholds. Regarding our budget development work, on December 15th, I presented to our Board of Education a recommendation for the FY 2023 operating and capital budgets. Our board has conducted 2 public hearings on the budget, as well as a public workshop that was held earlier this week. As you take the time to review what has been recommended and what will eventually be adopted by the board and sent forward to our county executive, you will see that this year is the first in what will be several years of changes and increased requests for funding. These changes and increases are a direct result of 2 unique and simultaneous initiatives: the blueprint and the funding cliff associated with the federal ESSER funding that we have received. Regarding the blueprint, school systems across the state are working to implement the salary increase mandates. The immediate need is the $10,000 salary increase beginning this July 1 for those teachers that have achieved national board certification. Likewise, by FY 2024, we must implement a 10% salary increase for teachers. We've already added 3%, which leaves 7% increase over the next 2 years that we must achieve. Likewise, we are working to increase access to pre-kindergarten for those qualifying families as outlined in the blueprint. Regarding the ESSER funding, which is one-time funding, as you know, many of the initiatives paid for that, and that funding paid for many initiatives that will sunset over time. Some, however, of those initiatives we plan to build into the school system's operating budget over time to ensure those initiatives and programs continue operation into the future. A prime example of that would be the use of ESSER funds to purchase Chromebooks for students, laptops for staff, and software and internet security enhancements to create more technology-enhanced instructional delivery model. We will need to continue to pay for those initiatives through our operating budget. This school year has been the most challenging I have encountered in my time as a system administrator. In addition to implementing the changing COVID protocols and mitigation strategies, the planning and implementation of meals for our students, the acquisition, distribution, and use of technology, and transitioning from in-person to virtual, then to hybrid instruction, and now back to in-person instruction, we have also been experiencing persistent staffing challenges. Throughout this school year, we are experiencing shortages of teachers, bus drivers, kitchen staff, teaching assistants, and substitute teachers. These ongoing shortages have stressed our operational system and our people. Like our colleagues around the state, we work daily to support our staff and maintain a high continuity of operations. Finally, members of the delegation, this may very well be the last time I formally present to this esteemed body. So I want to take a moment to thank you for your work on behalf of Anne Arundel County and the state of Maryland. More importantly, however, I want to say thank you for taking the time to work with me over the past 8 years as your superintendent. I am honored to serve this wonderful community and have appreciated not only your unwavering support of our awesome school system, but developing relationships along the way with so many of you. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn things back over to you, Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Dr. Arlano. And before we open it up for any questions, I want to take the opportunity to thank you for your years of service to the county. I mean, educating our children is something that is incredibly important. They are the future. So I want to thank you for all that you've done and for your years of service. And I also want to thank the school board for, the tremendous work that they do. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions that we may have for Dr. Arlotto. No question. Oh, I see Delegate Lehman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto, and thank you for your service to the families, students and families of Anne Arundel County. The description you gave of the schools that shut down temporarily based on outbreaks. I'm curious. That's an interesting and a common sense approach. Where did those standards? Who created those standards for the thresholds that triggered virtual learning? And have other systems done that for just on a school by school basis? Because it makes a lot of sense, and I had not heard that approach before.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman. So those thresholds and standards were established by the Maryland Department of Health. And then adopted by Dr. Kalyana Raman in our Department of Health and shared with us. That threshold is standard across the state. And then how each individual Department of Health is working with their school system, with their district is, of course, district by district dependent. I do know other districts that are around the state, as I talk with my colleagues almost daily around the state, that are closing similarly. There are some districts that are closing for a 10-day period. We are closing for a 5-day period following both MDH and CDC guidelines, and then returning students to school after that 5-day period. So as I said, we currently have 6 schools. That data is being watched. We have shared enrollment and staffing data with our Department of Health. So we are able to monitor each positive case as it ticks up or ticks down during a 14-day period, which allows us to plan several days, hopefully in advance of a school closing. Thank you for the question.
And Mr. Chairman, one quick follow-up, if that's okay.
Sure. Delegate Lehman, followed by Delegate Bagnall, and then Delegate Chisholm.
And thank you, Dr. Arlotto, for that answer. That's interesting, the 5-day versus 10-day. Just quick follow-up. What, if anything else, is done during those 5 days with that particular school population? Like, what are you advising parents or families to be doing during that time so that that interruption is successful, and that when you return on the 6th day, that, there aren't more cases? What are you encouraging them to do during that time, or to ensure that more kids aren't returning after having been incubating, COVID, and don't return on the 6th day with more cases?
Yes, ma'am. So there are 2 things that we are encouraging. The first is that parents watch their children carefully for any change in symptoms. If they at all become symptomatic, fevers or other of the COVID symptoms, that they get their child tested and they take their child to their to their family doctor. The other is, we're telling folks they need to tune in and they need to go to class during that 5-day period. So we operate virtually. We have, as I mentioned in my remarks, those teachers go home with their laptop and their teaching materials. Those students go home with their Chromebook and their charging cord, and they log on and they have synchronous instruction throughout the day with their teachers.
Thank you.
Delegate Bagnall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to second, our chair's comments. Dr. Arlotto, thank you so much for your service. I know your heart in terms of your commitment to our education system and our young people. I did want to circle back with your comments about the staff and teacher shortages, because I know that your transition is actually going to be happening as we're entering the summer break. So can you speak to any sort of recruitment efforts that we're putting in place so that we can make sure that we're staffing up when we do have that downtime? And also, do you think that we're going to need to look at a hold harmless? Where are we in terms of enrollment? And are we going to need hold harmless in terms of the funding?
Thank you, Delegate. Let me talk briefly about the shortages, and then Mr. Sheknovich can step in and talk a little bit about the funding and how that will impact us. So are we going to be doing anything particularly different? Let me start with that regarding the staffing shortages. And the short answer is no. We have robust recruitment efforts that we utilize each and every year with our human resource department and our recruiters. And so those efforts will continue. In certain areas, like our bus drivers, we have partnered, bus drivers at A's, we've partnered with our county executive, and he's provided some of his ARP funds, some of his federal funds to utilize those funds to pay signing bonuses and retention bonuses for our current drivers, contracted drivers, and potential drivers and aides. And so that is a fabulous partnership, which we hope will bear fruit. We will continue to turn over enter all those areas that we can, I should say, to recruit. It is we are not the only school system experiencing the shortages. So we are competing against the school systems across the state and across the country in terms of recruiting teachers and custodians and food nutrition service, bus drivers, aides, and the like. And so we have a very dedicated and robust recruitment team in HR, and they'll continue that work. Mr. Sheknovich, want to talk a little bit about the enrollment counts?
Certainly, and for the record, I'm Alex Sheknovich, Chief Operating Officer for the school district. So fortunately, the General Assembly, as you recall, created a stopgap rolling average methodology for school districts. So school districts could look at their enrollment as that traditional one-year snapshot, that traditional September 30th student canvas or count. And then the General Assembly provided another methodology that allowed a 3-year rolling average looking across or discounting the 2020 heavily COVID impacted year. This school district here in Arundel, just like all of our colleagues across the state, ran the numbers both ways, Delegate Bagnall. And here for Anne Arundel, fortunately, using the 3-year rolling average methodology, we had a very small mathematical enrollment increase, just under 338. So we will, in fact, wind up in a position to receive a positive funding number from the state, albeit modest. Had it not been for that 3-year rolling average with the discounting of that one heavily impacted COVID year, we would have been upside down. I will say that is not the case, as you now are hearing from many of my colleagues across the state using both methodologies, Delegate Bagnall. They're actually negative, upside down in their student numbers. So I encourage the delegation to work diligently to look at options, certainly to the benefit of Anne Arundel, making sure that we don't get hurt here locally, right? But our colleagues across the state desperately need to help, especially those that were negative using both methodologies. And thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so the chair recognizes Delegate Chisholm, Senator Simonaire, Delegate Saab, followed by Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Arlotto. I just want to take a moment of personal privilege and thank you as well. Every time I hear you speak, I can feel the passion you have for our students. You do it with a high degree of character, and you do it with integrity. And I think the most refreshing thing I can say about you is, in a politically divisive world, I really have no clue what your political leanings are. I can guess or whatever, but your focus has always been on the students, and I appreciate that. I know you did not get into this business to be a virologist, an epidemiologist, or a primary care physician, and you've been thrown into that. So I'm going to avoid all the scientific questions for now, but I do want to ask, and because I can't find it in the budget, how many students do we actually have enrolled right now, and how many teachers are actually employed by Anne Arundel County Public Schools knowing that the labor shortage is across all industries, and we hear it every day. I know it personally. It's something everybody's dealing with. So I'm curious on how many we actually have right now in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. What's the total? Because I'm trying to add up all these numbers, and then how many students do we actually have enrolled right now?
Mr. Sheknovich, what's the enrollment count right now?
Our enrollment here is just slightly north of 83,000 students.
And how many teachers are on?
But it's roughly 6,000 teachers. We've got about 12,000 employees total, but it's roughly 6,000 teachers.
And then if I added up everything, including, on your blueprint, how many teachers and staff would be total? Do we know?
Total of teachers and staff?
Correct. If we have 12,000 now, is there a number that we think we would need to hit this blueprint?
Is there a number that we would need to implement blueprint? Trying to think of the positions that are directly related to blueprint. Right now, for the upcoming year, it begins with pre-kindergarten. So we really we're in need to add pre-kindergarten teachers and pre-kindergarten TAs. And what am I missing, Mr. Sheknovich, with regard to direct relation to the blueprint?
No, that you're correct there, Dr. Arlotto. We're requesting about 54.5 positions for the pre-kindergarten initiative. The only other initiative that's directly tied to blueprint at the moment really has to do with our community schools. And we're requesting about 17 positions that are directly tied to the community schools. I will say, although not directly tied, it is a component of the blueprint. However, is our very heavy emphasis on special education. That cannot be understated, in that there's not a mandated formula, unlike the other two areas, Delegate Chisholm, but special education is a component of the blueprint as well. Thank you.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Dr. Arlotto, nice to see you. We were friends before you became superintendent, and I'm sure we'll be friends after. Just a couple brief questions with brief answers. You mentioned the 6 schools that are going virtually. I know we've learned a lot over the last 2 years. How is that transition going from in-person to virtual back to in-person? Is that getting much smoother?
It is. So I think we, overall, of course, as you know, we went back to fully in-person in September, Senator Simonaire, and overall, I think the transition has been good. We are struggling less with the academic transition than with the social emotional transition, that students are now back operating on a bell schedule, back operating with their classmates and sharing toys and being in the hallway and in a cafeteria. So we are actually seeing more challenges on that social emotional end than we are on the academic end. And now, as you referenced, the schools that are closing, they're in person, they're having to go virtual for what could be upwards of a 5-day period and then switch back to in person. This is our first week of implementing those changes. So far, so good, knock on wood. Our teachers, the bottom line is it takes people to do this. And our principals, assistant principals, our teachers, our counselors, our TAs have been nothing short of phenomenal to prepare for that transition and to engage those students virtually, synchronously, in real time, as we are doing now, during the time that they will be in that short period of in-person instruction pause.
Okay, just one last question. I was riding down to Annapolis today, and I heard on the radio that Anne Arundel County had exhausted all its snow days and used 2 more or something. And they also said that the students would get out of school now, I think June 24th. So one is, you can provide this to me later, but just confirm that June 24th is correct, and how many snow days you have built into your calendar.
So let me address the second question first, Senator Simonaire. We have 3 days built in to the calendar, and that's what's mandated by MSDE. Some school systems build in more, say Allegheny County, because of the amount of snow they have, but we have to have, each school system has to have a minimum of 3 inclement weather days built into the calendar, and that's what we have. Regarding your second point, we've used a total of 5 days. So we have utilized the 3 days that were built in. That adds 2 more days. And based on our protocols here in Anne Arundel County, we then start to add those, any days beyond what's built into the calendar gets added on to the end of the year, because we have to have, as you well know, a minimum of 180 days of instruction. We do have the opportunity to apply to the state for a waiver of the 180-day rule, which we have done in the past. We will in all likelihood do again this year, but I can't guarantee that the end of the school year will be on the 24th, because if we have additional inclement weather days, those days will be added on to the 25th, 26th, and beyond.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Delegate Saab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. And Dr. Arlotto, I'd like to echo Delegate Chisholm's sentiment, and your passion and energy has always been felt, not just here in delegation, but anytime we've reached out to your office and talked to you, you've always been accessible, and we didn't always agree on the answers, but our relationship has always been a good relationship, and I think the school system will greatly miss you next year. So I want to circle back a little bit on the trigger points that triggers a school closure. And I understand you said that we follow the MDH guidance. Can you be more specific and share with the delegation what are those trigger points? And does the school system have the flexibility to disagree when some of those guidance can be called unreasonable, such as closing school or even canceling proms and et cetera? Do we have the flexibility to disagree? And who makes that decision?
So the threshold for a school closure as a result of outbreaks, which is a very specific term in the public health sector, is it's been established at 5% of the students and staff that are eligible to be vaccinated. When 5% of the students and staff test positive for COVID from that school over a 14-day period. So we are, as I said in my brief opening remarks, Delegate Saab, we are monitoring that on a daily basis at all of our schools, as is our partners, Department of Health, and we talk to them several times a day. Reaching the 5% threshold does not automatically call for a school closure. 5% threshold, as we approach that, and we're watching it go from 3% to 4% to 4.5 to 4.8 and finally to 5, what that then triggers between us and our partners, the Department of Health, is a closer look as to why that school reached the 5%. So let me give you an example. If it's 5% reached at a middle school, but the majority of that 5% are in the 6th grade, then most likely the health department won't ask us to close the entire school. They'll ask us to close the 6th grade. So we look at it in as close a way as we can, so that we are not, again, I am not, and Dr. K is not in a place where we want to close schools. We're looking for a way to not close the schools. I assure you that in those conversations. So we look at it at a very granular level. Where are the majority of those positive cases? Are they among staff? Are they among students? And if they are among more students, what grade level? But if they are in the cases where we've closed these 6 schools now, they are spread out around and much more random across the different grade levels, K through 5, that the decision is then made to close the school. That decision is made by the Department of Health. Do we have the wiggle room to disagree? Absolutely. But I don't have the authority to override the health department. So when the health department, in other aspects, we can accept or not accept their recommendation. But when it comes to outbreaks, they have the authority to close a school, just like they could close a restaurant or a movie theater. They have, Dr. Kalyanaraman has the authority to close a school. And so we work very closely with them, but I assure you, we don't hit that threshold and it becomes an automatic closure. We're looking at it at a granular level to see where the bulk of those positive cases fall within that school. And the Monarch Academy of Glen Burnie is a prime example of that. They are a K-8 school, so they have both an elementary and a middle school. The majority of their cases were in the middle school, so their middle school closed. Their middle schoolers are at home for 5 days on virtual instruction, while the remainder of all the elementary school students are in place and in-person instruction.
Thank you. And what about, the decisions to cancel proms or events that are made individually on schools? Is this done by the principal, or do you get involved and can you override their decisions?
I am absolutely involved. So right now we are fully planning for graduations and proms this spring at the high schools. So those are in full go mode. We'll have our commencements hosted at a live event center at Arundel Mills. And the proms will be at a variety of different locations that the schools pick. But we've met with the high school principals and we're in full planning for both proms and graduations for this spring.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Arlotto, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Delegate Howard, followed by Delegate Munoz.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Dr. Arlotto. Good morning, colleagues. Dr. Arlotto, what is ESSER funding? I'm on page 13 of your budget overview. Can you lay out for the delegation what exactly ESSER funding is and what its intended purpose of use is?
Yes, sir. And where I fall short, I'm sure Mr. Sheknovich or Mr. Stansky will jump in and correct me so we give you a full and complete answer. Delegate Howard, the ESSER funding were 3 tranches of funding that came from the federal government. Beginning in 2020. So when schools closed in 2020 around the country, the federal government made the first tranche, what we call affectionately as ESSER 1 funding, became available. And the overall majority of that funding was earmarked and used around the country to access technology, because now school systems had to, as you're well aware, go from in-person, and we flipped on a dime to go to virtual instruction. So we had to purchase hardware that would be Chromebooks and laptops. We had to purchase software and access like the Google Suite and Google Meet, so we could have virtual instruction. So the first tranche was, as again, we call ESSER 1 funding. That funding has long been spent. Then was a second tranche, which was ESSER 2 funding. That included some money earmarked to continue to support the technology initiatives, particularly in the area of being sure students and families could access the internet. So we have spent some of those funds on with our partners at Comcast or Verizon to ensure families were connected to the internet. We've purchased hundreds of Wi-Fi hotspots, and we've distributed those to families that were in need. And then those funds have also been used for tutoring for students. And then the third tranche, which is monies, a total of $108 million, we were awarded here in Anne Arundel County through MSDE. That third tranche of money, we are just now getting our hands on and beginning to spend. And the overwhelming majority of that money will be spent on credit recovery, learning loss for those students that are falling behind. We were using a lot of those monies for during the day tutoring, after school tutoring, and paying for robust summer programming for our students for catch up and for enhancement of their learning. So that's in a real quick 30-second overview of those fundings. Mr. Sheknovich or Mr. Stansky, anything to add that you think would be additive to those remarks?
Certainly, Dr. Arlotto. The only thing I would add for the benefit of delegation is that the funds were also eligible for PPE, for HVAC enhancements, for improved filtration, all of the protective elements that enabled our staff and youngsters to come back into the building. So it was all the money had to be spent, like Dr. Arlotto indicated, on either facilitating instruction, recovering from learning loss, and then safety and health related items. So that was the only item I'd like to add, Dr. Arlotto. Thank you.
So those were federal funds. Were those fenced off, or were they able to be diverted in the budget?
A very prescriptive funding source.
Were any of those funds used for anything other than what their intended use was for, like teacher incentive?
No, not at this time. No.
So no one voted to divert any of those funds for any other programs?
So our Board of Education is considering utilizing some of those funds for some negotiated bonuses with our teachers and other employees, I should say, overall, not just teachers. And those conversations are going on right now. Those negotiations are going on right now with our unions.
How much?
Well, we don't know yet what is going to be what yet is going to be decided on. There is a number of possibly $12 million that could come from those ESSER funds that could support those bonuses.
Well,
Delegate Munoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm done.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Arlotto.
Good morning.
I have had quite a few questions from members of our community regarding the snow day yesterday, so I thought I would piggyback a little bit off Senator Simoneur's question. I've been asked, since students are prepared to go virtual, why the county is not going virtual for snow days rather than extending the school year. And I am aware of, I guess there's private schools in the county that were virtual yesterday and students were learning from home even though they were not in school. And obviously I am not qualified to answer that question, so I thought I would pass it along to you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to answer that question. So there is as you well know, there's a huge difference between a private school of 400 and a school district of 83,000. And so we, unlike the private schools, have to follow the MSDE rules and guidelines. And so we are required to operate on a 180-day calendar as a minimum of in-school instruction. So we have, and I'll use the term we, the superintendents across the state have asked the state for permission to go virtual during inclement weather days and have those days count as our 180 days. Up to this point, we have not been granted that authority to have an inclement weather day and go virtual, synchronous or asynchronous, and still count as our 180 days. The Maryland State Department of Education and State Superintendent, Mr. Chaudhary, has just released to superintendents an option that will allow us to do just that. I received that information Tuesday of this week. And the long story short, Delegate Munoz, is that we have to create a plan that we have to, of going virtual during an inclement weather day, that we have to, one, present publicly to our board and the public, and two, get approved from the Maryland State Department of Education. We are going to go through that process now, and I will work with our board president to put this on an upcoming agenda as quickly as possible. We have a plan that we know we can implement because we're doing it now with those schools that are switching to virtual as the short-term closures because of outbreaks. Mm-hmm. And so we are preparing a plan for approval from Maryland State Department of Education that will allow us to do just that. Let me circle back to where I started because it's really important. Up to this point, The 24 jurisdictions in the state have not been given permission by the Maryland State Department of Education to switch to virtual and have that day count during an inclement weather day, though we have been asking since August.
Well, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the clarification. I'm sure these parents will be very excited to hear that you're working towards that. So thank you very much.
Well, I will, let me say, and I'll say this just tongue in cheek, Mr. Chairman, they're really happy for it until you have a really great snow day and everybody wants to go sledding. And Dr. Arlotto said, no, open up your laptops and your Chromebooks, and we're going to have instruction for 6 hours. They might not be as happy then.
All right, thank you, Dr. Arlotto. The chair recognizes Delegate Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. And you're absolutely right. Snow days, they do something great for our morale as well as you know. So anyway, I just wanted to ask my question. Thank you so much for I wanted to say thank you so much for your years of service, 8 years. And you are doing a terrific job of making all of this plain, that which is very complicated, making it plain and understandable for us. And I appreciate that. I had the opportunity yesterday to get an education from some members of the National Federation of the Blind, and they brought up some issues with respect to software. And I wanted to know, this was, throughout the state of Maryland, I wanted to know how Anne Arundel County is faring with our software, and does it provide adequate accessibility for visually impaired and blind students? Specifically, they were stating that the screen reader cannot read images. So the screen reader actually will read out aloud what is going on the screen, but when they get to images, they can't go any further because the screen reader doesn't have the ability to read the image. So there are some programs, there are some applications, software applications that can do this. And I didn't know where Anne Arundel County stood and whether or not there's anything in the budget to upgrade us to the level where our screen readers can support visually impaired and blind students. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Bartlett. I don't have an immediate response to that. I know that we have enhanced because we have several students and staff members that need assistance and supports as they are blind. I don't know about the screen reader. I'll ask Dr. McMahon or Mr. Mosier if they have any information regarding that screen reader. And if not, I'll get back to you, Delegate Bartlett. Dr. McMahon, any updates on that?
Yeah, from an instructional point of view, when we review all instructional materials for purchase and consideration for purchase, we look at those issues, Delegate Bartlett. So we want to make sure that our students with all types of specialized needs can access the instructional materials. The other piece of this is inside our virtual learning, our bright space, our learning management, as well as on our website, and Mr. Mosier can speak to this, everything is ADA compliant. And so on our website, when you actually track over the images, they can be read to them. So whether that's a student or just a member of the public. So we really do adhere to this. You are correct in saying that some materials at times do not have this flexibility, but we often veer away from the purchase of those materials when that's the case. Thank you.
Delegate Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. I had a quick question. This was touched upon in our legislative breakfast at the board, but I was hoping that potentially we could drill down a little bit. Dr. Tobin spoke to this, and it's really surrounding our pre-kindergarten expansion under the blueprint. We have in the blueprint, we have eligible private providers, and we have a threshold and clear-cut ways that we can go about that. I was curious, it was alluded to in that meeting that not a lot of folks have stepped up. Do we have numbers on private providers who have come to Anne Arundel County Board and said, we would like to participate in the pre-kindergarten expansion.
We do. Mr. Stansky, do you have a number, or Dr. McMahon? But we do. We have, and this is blueprint, Delegate Jones, in that we work very closely with those private providers because those students eventually become our students. So we know who they are over the years as they matriculate into our kindergarten programs or our pre-kindergarten programs. Mr. Stansky?
Thank you. For the record, Matt Stansky, Director of Financial Operations for the district. We just met with probably a handful of private providers, but just to give you an idea of what the process is actually MSDE will be submitting a list of eligible and interested private providers to the district in February. But we have been doing some outreach since, the fall to try to get folks interested. But the feedback we heard from the private providers is really around the revenue that they would be getting in the first couple of years, which is roughly $13,000 per student, would not cover their costs, basically because of the requirements around paying their personnel a similar package, both salary and benefits, to what a public provider would pay. So that would create a situation in their schools where they would have one or two folks making significantly more than the rest of their employees in their businesses. And so, most of these are either nonprofit or in some cases for profit, where the profit margin's very small. And so the revenue was sort of prohibitive for them, given the requirements outlined in the blueprint to participate. So we'll see in February how many have actually signaled to MSD whether they're willing to participate or not. But as it was alluded to, the bill requires us to have at least 30% next year of our eligible pre-K students enrolled in the private sector.
Chair recognizes Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Chair. I think Dana had a follow-up, but if you don't mind, Dana, I'll go real quick. The ESSER funding is $18,755,705. And you said 10 to 12 million of that could be diverted. That's what the negotiation for right now, 10 to 12 million.
The third tranche of the ESSER funds, again, there were three tranches. The third tranche is the ESSER 3 funds, which was 108 million.
Right.
That we received.
Mm-hmm. In total.
In total from that tranche, correct?
Right.
Yes, sir.
Under page 13 of your budget, $18,755,705. And so the 10 or 12 million that you're talking about will come out of that.
Will come out of the total 108 million. So we received it. We did not receive 108 million all at once.
Right.
We receive it in pieces, and it becomes part of that year's fiscal budget. We have to account for it in the years that we receive that money. So, so we would, if in fact this moves through, Delegate Howard, and is approved, negotiated and approved through the Board of Education, then that bonus funds, we would then have to apply back to the state of Maryland, because when we received word, each school system received word that they were going to receive a established amount of money, in our case, 108 million, we had to create a plan about how we would spend that money.
Right.
We sent that plan to MSDE. They approved the plan and then started reimbursing us for the funds that we started spending on that plan. We would have to alter that plan should this move forward, these bonuses move forward and be approved. We'll then have to apply to the state of Maryland to change our ESSER 3 spending plan, that grant, to now include this possibly $12 million in bonuses for our staff.
Right. And that money is supposed to go. The reason I'm concerned is that in a more rural district like mine, connectivity and last mile is an issue. And it seems like that money's being diverted when its intended purpose was connectivity and sort of last mile. So I'm just a little concerned, and that's okay. I can continue to dig. Who would that plan be submitted to, and who would have to approve the changes?
Well, we would have to ultimately send it to the Maryland State Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who they may have a committee, a person. I don't know who will do the approval of changes to ESSER funding plans. I don't know who that is, but I certainly can ask MSDE if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. It just seems like these funds are being diverted outside of their intended purpose. So I'll get to the bottom of it in writing. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Delegate Howard. So the final question will go to Delegate Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just, my second thought was Dr. Arlotto or Dr. Tobin, in the pre-K expansion and speaking to, as you was alluded to by Matt, that you sat down and spoke to private providers for the pre-K expansion. What is your list of fixes? Can we have an offline potentially conversation of these are the top 3 things that we see we need help from the state in making this happen? Thank you.
I'll just jump in and say thank you, Delegate Jones. I would welcome that, because I think this is a place where some simple practical work together could make a big difference. Thanks.
So with that, let me sort of conclude where I began, Dr. Arlotto, with thanking you for your years of service. Really appreciate all that you've done for our school system. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all that the members of your team have done. As I said before, educating our kids is, one of the most important things that we do. So I also want to take a point of personal privilege, and I want to thank Delegate Bartlett for her leadership, as we went into this pandemic, and thank her for her assisting me with the transition into this role. So that is much appreciated. I also want to mention to the delegation that I've been working very closely with the chair of the Senate delegation, Senator Elfreth. I think we're having our 4th meeting today, and we're only in our first full week of the session. And that's really to make sure that, in Anne Arundel County, both chambers, speak with one voice to the extent possible, and that, we respect our crossover bills, budget matters, and all things that we do together. The final thing that I will mention before I ask for a request for adjournment is that I know that everybody's time is valuable, and I know that we all have a lot of things going on. And so to that point, the goal, and I say goal because it may not always be possible, is to sort of keep these meetings at about an hour. I know that our good friends and colleagues from Prince George's have another meeting to go to after hours. And so I would just ask that we be respectful of one another's time, and that we try to the extent possible, keep these delegation meetings at about an hour. So we're just slightly beyond that today, but that will be the goal going forward. So again, I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to serve in this capacity this session. And so with that, I'll ask if there is a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second? It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
The meeting is